We started Culturally Speaking to indulge our curiosity about the way others live and a desire to inspire conversations about how we have far more in common than we realise. Okay, today's guest. Firstly, can I just say we both had a bit of a girl crush when we were talking to her, because Suzi was, she just embodies fabulousness. Everybody who knows me knows I love to use that word far, far too much, but she is genuinely the most fabby individual.
But you just want to be friends with her.
I know, and she's so captivating. The story as well.
Great storyteller.
Absolutely wild. Wild is the word that I would use to describe this week's episode. When we came across Suzi, I think neither of us really knew the extent to which her story would touch upon the wider story that we all know. And then it's when we started to dig into it a little bit more that we realized just how much Suzi knew and had seen. Really, really interesting. I guess I'm going to ask you, have you been to Australia, by the way?
When I was quite young.
Oh, so
I think I've been to Sydney and Melbourne, potentially. And I don't remember much of it. So I remember having amazing fresh cinnamon donuts at the Sydney Harbour. And I remember being in a helicopter. And I do remember going to this kind of farm situation where I got to feed, like the little lamb situation and, with the bottle.
Like a sheep station.
Yeah. And then we got to see sheep shearing. And I was chased around by an ostrich. And I say this with absolute fear in my eyes, remembering it, because I was little, so the ostrich was large. I met some baby wallabies. That was cute.
Aww.
I carried a koala.
Yes.
Pretty heavy and a bit smelly. And kangaroos are massive. So a lot of my memories kind of go around food and animals. You'll find that increasingly. That's all I remember.
I love that.
Oh my God, and the food. The fresh seafood there was just amazing. The food there was really good.
I'm getting a sense of this. Maybe it's someone we need to add to the list. The never-ending travel list for culture.
We just need a kind of around the world in 80 days, but more like 80 years.
80 days wouldn't cover it, would it?
No, it would be a whistle stop, get off, get on. But we do need a world tour.
On that note.
Yeah, let's not give away too much of Suzi's story and get into it.
Hi, I'm Suzi Dent. I live on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. I'm a hair and makeup artist. I work in film and television, and I have been doing this for 37 years. So I'd like to start my story in the 80s, because I grew up in the 80s. And the 80s in Australia was quite a chauvinistic kind of, it's a fairly sexist country to grow up in, really. Women didn't have many opportunities when I was young. So I finished high school and I finished what was sixth form, or now the equivalent of year 12. So I finished high school. And there wasn't much for women to do. You either matriculated into university, which I didn't because I was a sporty one, not an academic one, or back then the banks had a huge drive for females to go and work in the bank. So I got a job working in the bank before I'd even finished school, so it didn't matter. So I worked in the bank, which was very interesting. I learned a lot about male-dominated industry because there was a very, very, very low glass ceiling for women there. The highest you could get as a woman was teller A. Women weren't bank managers back then. They weren't accountants. They weren't actually allowed to. There was no space for them to actually be that or have that career. I remember something when I was a little girl. I remember my grandmother used to tell me, that I had to be really careful if I, this is about men and sexism, if I wore shiny black patent leather shoes, because men could actually look in them and see my knickers. And I had to be careful if I stood near a puddle, because puddles were like mirrors and men could look up your skirt and see your knickers. And I often wondered back then why men would be standing looking in puddles personally. But it always fascinated me. I've always remembered that because that was from my grandmother. So this is information that I've been given from like the early 1900s, that's the sort of things that women pass down generationally, to their daughters, granddaughters and other women about how to behave. When I worked in the bank, oh, wow, it was very sexist. I'm really lucky and I'm very blessed. I have a great set of legs, and I still do, which is lovely. And I'm very grateful for that. But back then, the uniform for women was either this little dress with very basic with a zipper up the front and sleeves and a collar, or you could wear trousers, right? Now, the accountant at the branch, he liked me to make him cups of coffee and he liked to look at my legs. And I remember one day, I think I was 19 or nearly 19, I wore the trousers to work because I really liked wearing pants, and I was sent home by him to put my dress on. Which in this day and age, you couldn't actually send a woman home to say, excuse me, I'd prefer you to put the little dress on so I can look at your legs while you're making me a cup of coffee, because that's so un-PC, right? But back then, you had to do what you were told as a woman. And I was a young woman and I didn't know any better. I was a teenager. So I went home, did what I was supposed to do and put my dress back on and then came back to work, At the same time, I was working for a restaurant because I was saving up to go overseas, because that's what you do when you're younger, right? You backpack. You go and explore. I wanted to backpack in Europe, and I wanted to go to England and visit my relatives, because I'm a first-generation Australian. This guy, the manager of this restaurant, the dress used to have had slits up to kind of just above your knee, right? So it was kind of mid shin, right? It started there, and he used to get he'd bring me into his office, and he'd get both hands, and he'd rip my dress to the waist every single shift. It was just amazing, and I'd get the stapler off his desk, and I'd go ka-chung, 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 and I'd staple my dress back together again. And I'd come in, and so I'd work the whole shift with the dress stapled down both sides, which, it's not great. But it's better than having splits to the waist. And then I'd come back in the next day and he'd say to me, have you sewn your uniform up? And I'd go, no. And he'd rip it again and rip the staples off. And then I know I'm laughing now because it just amuses me that this happened. Because it can't happen in this day and age, but things like this were quite commonplace in my life as a young woman, in 19, 20. This is the way I had to behave. This is with men, and you couldn't really, we didn't actually have the right as women back then to turn around and tell someone to F off. We didn't have the right to actually tell men no in that sort of way. No, that's not cool that you're ripping my dress, because men back then used their position of power and authority to take control, if you like, of women in the workforce, or kind of lord it over them, or just be abusive, I suppose. Or today you could call it taking liberties, which they both did. However, back then when I was 19, I've always had a wicked sense of humour. I didn't particularly like, not being able to wear trousers or having my dress ripped to the waist. And one day, I don't know where it came from, but I got this giant cockroach in Australia, and it was rubber, right? We have big cockroaches and they fly, right? And it looked really real. And the possibility that this cockroach, because both these men like me to make them coffee and look at my legs, got into this coffee cup was fairly high, because summer, they're all over the place. So I made both men in the same week a cup of coffee with this cockroach, and the screams of horror that came from their respective offices, just warmed my heart, I've got to say, So funnily enough, everyone, after that, neither men asked me to make them a cup of coffee again. I don't know why, and the dress ripping stopped at the restaurant. And I changed, in the bank, I changed what I wore. I ordered a uniform. I decided that I checked it out and I thought, okay, well, there's no rules. If I can't wear the trousers that I want to wear so I can hide my legs from the pervy accountant, I'm going to order some more uniforms. So I ordered more uniforms that were 2 sizes too big and 3 times too long. So I didn't hem them because there was no rules that said I had to wear a tight dress. There was no rules that said what length it was. So I wore a sack to work, and he could say absolutely nothing. And I didn't care because he wasn't looking at my legs, and I didn't feel like I was on display, for his enjoyment, So, wore the big dress, empowered myself as a 19-year-old by doing that. And that was a very interesting experience in the early 80s. So we're talking 1980. That would have happened. Yeah, so it's fascinating. The fascinating world of women in the 80s. Well, back then, if you wanted a bank loan, you had to actually get a man to go guarantor for you. A few years after that, I used to work for the Commonwealth Bank doing all their corporate videos, making up, and that the man, the head, the general manager, I couldn't go no higher. I asked him for a loan. I had to get, and he said yes, as long as I got a man to go guarantor. And the thing was, is the man didn't have to be related to me, right? He just had to be a man, right? So basically, hopefully this is not really, he had somebody with a penis. Just had to be a man. I even asked my mate, who was like 5 years younger than me, who wasn't making as much money as me, you want to sign this piece of paper? So I really want to buy some property. It's like, yeah, sure. But, I realized that it was just ridiculous because, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't have just any man sign for me. That was how women were treated back then. And you had to grin and bear it because that was how it was. In 1983, I trained as a makeup artist in film and television in the only school that was in Australia, which was amazing. I started doing freelance work and corporate videos, and I'd get, commercials and all that sort of stuff. And in 1986, I got a call to do this job with a really famous guy, Rolf Harris, which was amazing because I used to watch Rolf Harris on black and white TV when I was a little girl, I kind of grew up watching him. So I was very excited because he was the biggest star I'd ever worked with. So I was excited that this was happening. And I ended up working with Rolf Harris. And from the very beginning that he sat in my chair to have his makeup done, he decided he'd put his hands on me and run his hands up my leg and up the outside of my leg and into, the bottom of my shorts. That actually that groping went on all day. When I was in the studio with him, each time I went to touch his makeup up and powder his nose, because back then we were shooting with video and the studio lights were very hot because cool lights hadn't been invented yet. Lights without heat, they hadn't been invented. Quiet air conditioners had not been invented yet. So the air conditioner would have to be turned off. And the lights would make you sweat quite quickly. So it was very hot in the studios. And he would put his hands on my legs. He would try and shove his hands up my shorts. The director who was there at the time, so there was a studio full of men as well, because it's a male-dominated industry that I work in. Not so much now, but it certainly was back then. I had a long belt on because it was the 80s and that's what we used to wear. I was wearing just a baggy white T-shirt and baggy shorts. I never wore anything tight or fitted, a pair of Doc Martens, a little pair of white socks, That was my go-to uniform back then. I had a rip in my shorts, which was the beginning of denim being ripped, got to add. And he kept trying to, which it is now, it's much more ripped than it used to be. And he kept trying to shove his hand in the rip of my shorts, and I'd grab his hand by his wrist and go, please don't do that because you'll make the rip bigger. I couldn't say no, don't touch me, because the director was kind of egging him on. At one stage at the beginning of the shoot, they were both standing there whilst I was standing there discussing me and my body like I was a piece of meat, and discussing my legs and what I looked like. But that's what happened back then. It was kind of like women were seen and not heard. And you couldn't actually say anything like, hello, don't talk about me like that, because you didn't have a voice. Women didn't have a voice. We were not encouraged to speak. And if we did speak, we were belittled for doing so. And the amount of times that I got told by men who were either assaulting me or saying something like that was that if I didn't look the way I did, they wouldn't be so tempted, and I really should put a paper bag over my head. It's like, yeah, okay, well, maybe we could just cut your fingers off and your hands off. That'd be really good for everybody, wouldn't it? No, not really. I know I might sound a little bit frivolous and like I'm talking about this in a humorous way, but at the time and on the day, it wasn't humorous at all. The man wouldn't keep his hands off me. It was very uncomfortable. It was there was probably about 7 or 8 other men in the studio who did nothing. They said nothing. They did nothing. They just stood around and watched. I took myself to the back of the studio, thinking he wouldn't, ask me, but he'd keep, asking makeup. I didn't have a name, by the way. He never bothered to learn my name. He was too busy touching me. Then I decided I'd stay outside the studio, which you never do. You've always got to be on set. So I left and I stood outside the set. There's one young guy, actually there's two younger guys around my age, and they both knew I was really uncomfortable and wasn't happy. So whenever he did need powdering or de-sweating, they'd come out and get me. At the end of the day, of any day shoot, part of my job, apart from not upsetting the talent, which is why I couldn't say anything, because if you say something, he could have walked, he could have cost the studio thousands and thousands of dollars. It probably would have cost me my job and maybe everybody in the studio with me. I was under a lot of pressure to behave and smile and laugh it off. I had a lot of pressure on me. I think I felt really uncomfortable whilst he was touching me and knew that I couldn't say anything because my career was on the line and maybe the people in the studio's career was on the line as well. At the end of the day, it's my responsibility as a makeup artist to take the makeup off the talent, especially men, because back then the makeup was really, really thick because it was video. But there was no way I was going to go back into that small makeup room with Rolf Harris after he'd spent, 6 hours and 24 times touching me without being asked and without being welcomed. So I hid in a broom cupboard. There was a cleaning cupboard in the hallway, and I jumped in there as they all came out of the studio, and I could kind of see through the crack in the door. And I had left all my makeup kit in my makeup room, so it looked like I was coming back, but I had no intention of coming back. So he stood outside for maybe, 3 or 4 minutes waiting for me. And then the powers that be had come down, for the people that ran Channel 7, had come down to escort him out. So they came and got him, and there was lots of, backslapping and rah-rah as they escorted him out of the studio. And I waited for I probably stayed inside that cupboard for about 10 minutes until I made sure that he was gone, because I didn't want to eyeball him again. I didn't want to have anything to do with him, and I did not want to be in a room with him because I knew without a shadow of a doubt that he wouldn't stop what he'd already started because he was very comfortable touching me. So when he left, that's when I came out of the cupboard or came out of the closet, so to speak. After I packed up my kit, I went and saw the makeup artist who was in charge. She wasn't in charge of me that day because she was a freelancer, but I did know her, and she was in charge of Channel 7 Studios. And I told her that I just had the worst day with the dirtiest old man ever. And she said to me, "Oh, I thought you knew." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Oh, his nickname is the Octopus because he does this to makeup artists all over the country." And I'm like, how would I know that if you didn't tell me, right? And then she gave me this message. It was the weirdest thing. She gave me a message from the people who ran the studio, the men who ran the studio from upstairs, the powers that be that I spoke about that escorted him out. And the message to me was to congratulate me on how I had conducted myself with Rolf Harris that day. And I thought, hang on, I haven't actually complained yet. I haven't actually said anything yet. And it was that split second that I realised that they had all been watching as well. It wasn't just the men in the studio with me. It was the men upstairs. And they all watched too because they were in the control room in the edit suite just above us watching everything that was going on. So that was really disappointing. I just felt awful. I really did. I was at work. This was my working environment. I was not treated with respect. I was treated like an object. I was treated like it was one thing to be treated like an object by the talent, quite another thing to be treated like an object by the people I work with, by the crew that I'm with, So it was one of those really horrible examples of being a woman and standing alone in a room full of men who were just going to let whatever happened, because men didn't come forward to stand up and go, "Oi, don't do that. That's no good." At the end of the day, when I went home, I told my mum and dad, I told my friends, I rang so many of my friends because they all knew that I was working with Rolf Harris and I had been really excited. And I was certainly not very excited by the man that I had worked with. In fact, I was very disappointed. And from that day on, whenever anybody asked me, as they do, because I work with a lot of stars, who's the best person and the worst person you've ever worked with? The best person always changes depending on, who I've just been with. And the worst person has always been Rolf Harris. I would never work with that man again. I knew from then that I would never work for him again at all. I would just refuse the job point blank. But I never kept it a secret. So I didn't keep it a secret at the studio, and I did not keep it a secret with my friends ever, or anybody for that matter. I didn't keep it a secret. There was no reporting incidents like that because obviously the people that I would have reported to had already given me a pat on the head and gone, good job, little girl, So there was nothing I could do there. Couldn't come and say anything to there because they'd already finished it off. So, I think it's important that we do tell our nearest and dearest when things like this happen to us. As far as how it affected me, back then I would have said maybe that it didn't affect me, but looking back in time, I know that it did. Rolf Harris was the last man to ever touch me without being asked. I became very, very mouthy after that. If any man came near me, I would F off them really loudly. I told everybody where to go. I got very sweary. I got very good at using the F word as an adjective, a verb, a noun, really good at it. But I never, ever, no man ever touched me again after that. That was the last time I was ever polite to anybody who invaded my space. At the end of 2013, I was watching A Current Affair, and this woman was being interviewed, and she had been sexually assaulted whilst working with Rolf Harris as a teenager, as a 15-year-old. And she was telling her story. I remember watching her story and thinking, I know that you're not lying. The press back then, people were saying that she was lying because nobody believed any of the victims that came forward back then for historical cases. But I did, because I'd worked with the man and I knew that he was the octopus. So after I finished watching the show, I started doing some Googling because it was a UK, it was Scotland Yard and the Met Police. So I started looking up what the operation was called, which was called Operation Yewtree. And it was a big police operation in conjunction with the Met Police and Scotland Yard to actually listen to women and men with historical sex crimes for the first time. Not only were women being listened to, but they were being heard. And Operation Yewtree actually prosecuted many British stars, very, very big entertainers, and really, really shocked the world. And Rolf Harris was one of these. So when I came forward with my email and a few choice words like the octopus, they contacted me the very next day, and I was rung for an interview. So I had a verbal interview with one of the police, actually the policeman who was in charge of the case, and then he gave me my designated constable, and then it began. I became part of this case, which was groundbreaking in taking Rolf Harris down, and the police were very, very, very serious. They weren't just they were dotting their I's and crossing their T's. They made sure they got everything right. They sent police from the UK to interview my friends from 30 odd years ago. In Australia, they sent someone to Sydney. They sent someone to Victoria. I had the police come here and interview my then husband, who wasn't with me then but knew what I'd spoken to him about. And because of that, because of my testimony and because I could prove that I had spoken to my friends and that they knew what had happened, that I was chosen as a witness for the prosecution. So I was called a bad character witness. So basically I talked about my day with Rolf Harris and what happened to me when I was working with him, and what my experience of working with him was like. When we actually got to court, there was 3 women who had been sexually assaulted by him when they were teenagers. And there was 6 of us who were bad character witnesses. Another man was from completely another state who was an entertainer working with Rolf Harris, and he had seen Rolf grope a makeup artist and apparently thought that was me and was surprised that it wasn't. But I have since realised and come to know that there was many, many, many dozens of makeup artists. One of my best friends, who was actually one of my witnesses, was groped by him in England when she wasn't even working for him. She was working for someone else, and he walked past and grabbed both breasts as he went past 3 times. The man was a serial groper. It wasn't really good. So the thing is the case in 2014 called Operation Yewtree and taking down Rolf Harris with historical crimes and with other men has become known as the beginning of the Me Too movement, where women are finally, like I said, being listened to and being heard. In historical cases, we're not women just doing it for the money. The amount of people that think that women like me come forward for money, there was no money offered at all, nor would I have taken it if there was. I came forward for the women who were little girls when he groped them, whose lives were changed forever because of the experience with this man who used his celebrity and his money and his power and his position to take advantage of starstruck young girls and women. And that is just so wrong, and really it's just not good enough. That's why I came forward. I didn't come forward for me. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have come forward, because I was just groped. I wasn't penetrated or anything like that, like he did to other young girls. He groomed his daughter's best friend and slept with her in their house. You know, this was all proven stuff. So he was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years and 9 months jail. It doesn't seem like much, but apparently they had to base the sentencing on 1986 and how crimes were sentenced back then. He served in 2 jails, and he only served 3 years. And I believe he's living in his home again in Berkshire, or wherever he lives. However, Rolf Harris had all around the world, he had art and paintings. And in Australia, Australians thought he was amazing, and he was considered England's national treasure and a friend of the Queen, and he'd painted a royal portrait, and all his art is worth nothing. Every statue or anything in Australia that was actually put up for him has been knocked down and removed. All trace of Rolf Harris has been removed from everywhere. So as far as the sentence that he served, I think the stripping of all his everything was probably the biggest, slap that he could have been given by society, apart from actually serving jail. So I feel that he was absolutely punished for what he had done. And I really hope that the women who I was in court with, one of whom who had to stand behind a blanket because she couldn't make eye contact with him at the age of 49, which is so awful to have got to 49 and to not actually be able to look the perpetrator in the eye because your pain is that raw and it's still in you so much. And that sort of injustice for me spurs me on so much. So I've become a voice of the Me Too movement. I was named by the papers as the strongest bad character witness for the prosecution. My favourite headline was Australian television makeup artist dramatically stares down Rolf Harris in court. And I thought, I did that. I stared at him all the way out of the courtroom, and he did not make eye contact with me once. In fact, he turned his entire body away from me. Which was all written down by the hundreds of press that were sitting behind his perspex cage in the courtroom, which is where the headline came from. I was really pleased when I saw that, because I really hoped that the women who had been his victims, and there was many others that weren't chosen for the court case all around the world, I really hoped that they knew that there was a really buffy woman there standing there with them, that I wasn't scared of anything, and that I was there with them. So I felt that it was a really empowering headline. None of the headlines about me were anything but empowering. In fact, they were all positive. We were given lifetime anonymity by the court, so none of the press could use my name or my physical description. And that was really good back then, I've got to say. I was asked by the judge before I was chosen for the case. I had to write a letter to the judge about how I felt if my name was released to the press, because that back then the press wanted all the bad character witnesses, which would have been me. Back then I really didn't wish to be judged by millions of people and found wanting. However, my letter to the judge was very succinct and told him that it was his call. if he chose to drag me through the mud for being brave enough to come forward, that would stop other women like me coming forward. And then the women who had come forward would never get healing. And if we don't stand up for each other and support each other, then healing never happens. And I believe that was because of that testimony that I got chosen to be one of the bad character witnesses in this case, which was a very surreal experience. It was very weird reading the things I said and did in papers all over the world. And that was very strange. But I didn't think about myself. I really was there for the other women, to empower the other women and to help them heal. And by telling my story, I was backing up their story. So I was very pleased that I was strong, and I was buffy, and I was clear, and I was concise, and I didn't get tripped up in the courtroom by the lawyer who called me a liar at the end of my testimony, which unfortunately led to me storming out of the courtroom, staring down Rolf Harris, and a great couple of headlines. So she probably shouldn't have done that, because that really triggered me. So to be upset and angry at the same time. But it was I would do it again in a heartbeat, especially if it was for someone else who needed me, because I just can't stand injustice. Oh, if Rolf Harris was in front of me right now, he wouldn't have the foggiest who I was, I'm sure. But if he did, and even if he didn't, I would pretty much say, Rolf Harris, you picked the wrong Aussie chick to grope in 1986, mate. It's pretty much what I would say to him. Bad mistake, Buster. Yes, I think that would be what I'd say to him. I didn't have any preconceived ideas about how much time he should serve in jail. That wasn't for me to do. It was for me to tell my truth. That is exactly what I would say to Rolf Harris. You picked the wrong chick when you touched me in 1986. Any other survivors of sexual assault out there, and I know there are so many of us, so many, please don't think that what happened to you doesn't count. Please don't compare what happened to you and your journey with what happens to someone else. We all react in different ways when we're children, when we're adults, to being touched and being assaulted sexually. Always remember that your story is the most important thing for you and your healing. When we share our stories, we encourage others to come forward and share their stories. And each time we tell someone our story and share our story, it becomes a little bit less painful as we tell it. And I've been in a room and told my story, and had a young woman get up and tell her story for the very first time. And it was the most moving, powerful experience, surrounded by women in a room, for her to actually feel comfortable to do this. And it was the beginning of her healing journey. So for any of you out there, if you're really having trouble revisiting, you get a coach. Coaches are good, and not so much therapists. I talk to a lot of women who are victims of childhood sexual assault, and I've realised that seems to be my calling at the moment in life, and this is where I'm at. And I'm very humbled that I have women all over the world sharing their stories with me, and some for the very first time. And like I said, each time, if you can share your story, it will make it a little less painful. And there's things that we can do to revisit our past that can make it easier for us to go forward. But one thing I'd also like to share is that it's not your fault. It's never your fault. It doesn't matter how old you were, how young you were, what you were wearing, where you were standing, whether you'd been drinking, whether you hadn't been drinking. It is not your fault. It is the perpetrator's fault. So if you can remember that and hold that in your heart, that would be wonderful. And believe that 100%, that it's not your fault, is what I would like to say to all survivors out there. Tell your story and it's not your fault, and I love you all. It's about love. And if you can forgive yourself for being in that situation, for being wherever you are, for blaming yourself, then you will start to heal, because forgiveness is all about it. And if you actually can forgive your perpetrator inside your heart, not necessarily to their face, it will help you heal as well. So there's tricks and things that we can use to help ourselves heal, and journeys that we can go on in our mind and in our heart and in our spirit, to keep healing happening and to help ourselves and others heal. You know what gives me hope for the future? The fact that the Me Too movement, with that hashtag that came out in 2017 and went viral around the world, and millions of women put their hands up and shared that hashtag. What that gives me hope is that we are all united. We are part of the biggest global healing movement for women that the world has ever seen. Women are standing up and we are being heard, and we are speaking and we are being heard. And that's what we need to do. In America, the UK and New Zealand, the law is such that women can come forward and they can tell their stories. And the law of defamation, for instance, is more in favour of the victim than the perpetrator. In my country, my laws need changing. It's not quite as easy here for women and men to come forward. However, it can be done. Sometimes, though, we're still seeing very high-profile cases that are having very disappointing results, because the legal system is often against us, and lawyers are very clever with their words, and they're using these men, their ages against them. Oh, well, they're in their 80s now, so they can't really send them to jail, or we can't really prosecute them to the full extent of the law. But my hope is that we continue to move forward in the movement that we're in, that we continue to tell our stories of healing. We continue to tell our stories of sexual assault. The more we talk about it, like I said, the more healing we get. The more we talk about it, the more other people talk about it. And this huge healing wave that we're in, that's about healing and forgiveness for ourselves, is the most important thing in the world right now. So we keep moving forward with love and healing. And the Me Too movement is not about man bashing. It's about education. We're educating a couple of generations older than us on how to treat women and how to behave in the workplace and how to behave in real life. And now my son, who's 19, he doesn't talk to women the way his father's friends do, for instance. He's horrified, right? Because he's been raised by me. Yay! And that's another thing. Women, raise your boys. Raise them as feminists. And we will have males as feminists, What I mean is feminists so that they treat women correctly, so that they know the right things to do. They know that women are not second-class citizens. They know that we are equal. And they know how to touch and not touch and how to communicate. It's very important, and things are changing as the generations are getting on, and we just have to keep at it. It doesn't happen overnight when you're trying to educate a whole generational mindset. And the people that, like the judges in courts, they're old, right? They're that generation. They're the generation where women had their heads cut off by the glass ceiling, They're the ones that reached the top that didn't have any female competition. They're the judges that want their female prosecutors to wear skirts when they come into the courtroom and don't allow them to wear trousers. Goes back to me in the bank, really, doesn't it? It's a little bit dated, don't you think? It takes us a while, ladies, but we will get there. We will, as women around the world, things are changing in every single country. Hold the faith, move forward, stay strong, and for the next generation coming forward, we'll continue to change everything that's happened for women in the world. How would I rate my satisfaction with life out of 10 so far? I have been very lucky to have some amazing 10 out of 10 moments in my life. And when you have a 10 out of 10 moment, it sets you on a path that you really should be on. My satisfaction right now is 10 out of 10. I'm fully in touch with spirit, source, love, God, if you will. I'm moving forward with faith and hope for a great future. I show gratitude every single day for the life that I have, and the life that I'm moving towards, and the life that I've had. I wouldn't change anything about my life. And a lot of the parts of my life have been pretty sucky. I certainly didn't like them when I was in it. but they've all put together me. This is our journey. This is who I am. I'm the woman that I am today that steps forward for other women because I was raised by a narcissist mother who didn't care about me. So you got to take the learnings from our experiences and move forward. So I'm having an amazing time right now with life, and I'm very, very blessed with my life journey right now.
Okay, so I think, without a doubt, I think that was probably one of the heaviest topics, or I guess most shocking for me to hear, actually, of this season. And, the idea of people in power using that position to abuse others unfortunately, is not foreign to us, right? It happens in the world throughout time. So yeah, I mean, what did you think of Suzi's story?
We touched on it, but I mean, she's a great storyteller, and she told it with a lot of humor but also gravitas. I said at the beginning of the episode, and I didn't want to say too much, but Suzi got up in court and was a large part of an operation to bring down Rolf Harris and other men that have committed these crimes, despite it being an incredibly long time ago. But what was key to that was the fact that she had always spoken, to her friends, to her family, about what she experienced. And that's, I think, both rare and brave, because so often victims don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't share.
Right, because of the shame. And that is something that I did want to talk to you about, which is, in the UK, we've had a few also quite high profile cases involving celebrities, but also with commoners like us. And I do feel like, yes, things are progressing. We are getting more awareness of what this is, the warning signs and all of that. And I still feel that there is such an onus, especially being women our age who have, pretty normal social lives, which means we might be out late sometimes. The onus is very much on us to not get harmed. And, if you remember Suzi saying that, her grandma was saying you need to be careful when you're standing over a puddle, things like that. And I'm kind of like, when I was listening to that, I was like, are you serious? But then if you extrapolate that to conversations we hear, it's the same attitude still. It's, oh, you shouldn't be wearing that, or were you walking alone? Was it dark? But none of that should be reason that we would get hurt.
No, and I still think, innocent until proven guilty, of course, but the onus of providing proof to actually get a conviction is so incredibly challenging that, as you say, as a victim, you, firstly, this horrific experience that you've gone through in and of itself is an ordeal. Then to go and be able to talk to somebody, and particularly to talk to somebody in a position of power or authority, is, again, not an easy thing. And then to know that, as you say, the burden of proof will lie with you, and anything and everything will be used against you. But these are behaviors that you should be able to do. You should be able to walk down the street dressed how you want at a certain time of night, because it should not be the normal, the accepted thing that will incite a certain type of behavior in someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, also, actually, do you know of the Genovese case, Kitty Genovese?
No.
So this is relevant, I promise. So, when Suzi said, I think it was on the day when she was on the job, where people were congratulating her for how she conducted herself. And some people are, oh, you didn't know. So it kind of sounded like, number one, she wasn't the first person to be on the receiving end of this. Number two, people knew about it. People around her knew about it. People have seen, heard, they know things, and yet nobody came out to say anything. And I do understand that in that situation back in the day, he was considered a bit of a, I guess, god in the industry to those people, right? And so the reason I brought up this Kitty Genovese case is to talk about the bystander effect. So since you haven't heard of this, I'll give you a brief summary of what it is. Okay, so this happened a while ago in the 60s in America. Basically, this girl, a young woman, 28-year-old actually, so Kitty was going home, and it was dark and all of that. She was stabbed outside of her apartment building by someone. She was screaming. And I think the whole attack actually went on for some time because she had managed to get up, go into the apartment building lobby, got stabbed again. And I think there was potentially a sexual element to the attack as well. Now, while all that happened, I mean, imagine, right? We live in London. We hear things at night. Nobody actually called the police. Nobody did anything.
Not one person.
No. So she died, right, from this attack. And there's actually a very good documentary interviewing her brother. And the actual accounts, because of course this was back in the 60s, and not everyone, we don't have phones recording everything. So I think the actual accounts of how many witnesses there were, what actually happened is not entirely kind of 100%, but it's a very famous case used in psychology to talk about the bystander effect. And sidebar, but interesting fact, it was because of this that they had the 911 system set up. Before that, there was not a centralized emergency number. People called the police station. So, wow. Yeah. But I thought that was interesting because, you and I have been out sometimes where there's a rogue cyclist and, I will say something about it. Right? I am not that bystander who would say nothing. But it was just interesting to me. I wonder what you think about this bystander effect, and how would you have done something, or have you been in situations where
it's like NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. If it's so, you want to believe in the greater good of people, right? You want to believe that your fellow man or woman will, step in, but so often we don't. And when people say we live more insular lives, we're more self-centered, we're more focused than ever on our own betterment, and there isn't enough social cohesion. Mm-hmm. And then everyone says, no, it's all good. The youth, I say the youth because I don't feel like we are the youth today.
We're not the youth anymore, sadly.
No, actually they do have great social values, and they have, a oneness and an affinity for one another. Mm. I don't think that is actually true, because these horrific attacks, crimes, murders that we see, you literally just said it, right? People have got time to stand there and photograph it or video it, but they haven't got time to say anything.
Yeah. I know. But it's a hard one, I think, right? If I see someone being attacked physically on the street, I think I would worry about my physical safety. But I would call the police immediately.
And I also, I'm, again, I think you know me in real life, I'm a very petite individual. In all likelihood, I would be worried for my safety too. But that doesn't mean there aren't other ways to help you, as you say. And, what kind of person am I if I turn a blind eye? Because then how can I expect someone to help me if I were to ever be in trouble? I mean, it's simple things, right? think about the number of times, again, pre-COVID, you've been on the tube and everybody's just in their own little bubble. Nobody wants to help anyone. If someone drops something, everyone sort of like skirts away. Like, and that's on the like tube, right? Where nothing particularly threatening is happening. Other than, again, you might be being filmed. There are people who get very handsy.
This reminds me of like in American cartoons when all the kids are like cooties, you know, like they don't want to touch you. That's exactly like that. And yeah, I mean, I hope that Suzi's story actually will inspire people to, you know, within reason and keeping your own safety as a priority, but do something about it. You know, if you see injustices, if you see, especially for people like us, you know, in the workplace, whether it's, you know, just normal verbal abuse or people being disrespectful, or sometimes even, I guess, on the more unsavory side of things, I think there needs to be better systems around those things. You know, it doesn't have to be a celebrity doing it to make it bad.
I agree. Can I also just say, to end, how much we, again, loved Suzi. She's such a girl's girl.
Yes.
She made me feel, like you say, I wanted to be her friend.
And she gave us good tips on hair and skincare.
Yes, I can, again, obviously massively talented in what she does. But yeah, just the way that she engages other people, you know? I think we need more people like Suzi in the world. Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite podcast platform and follow us on Instagram at Culturally Speaking Podcast. You can also check out our website, culturallyspeaking.co.uk, for a transcript of this episode. Share your stories or your show ideas with us by sending us an email at theculturallyspeaking@gmail.com.